On New Year's Eve, while the city counted down to fireworks and champagne, a worn-out biker rode through the cold with only his dog and an old Harley for company. He wasn't looking for miracles. He was just trying to get home. But in a dark alley behind a closed supermarket, his German shepherd stopped, refused to move, and then the dog whispered a name the man hadn't heard in years. The woman in the snow didn't recognize him. She didn't know her own past, but the dog did, and that single moment would change all three of their lives forever. New Year's Eve, Chicago never softened itself for anyone, but on New Year's Eve, it seemed to sharpen its edges on purpose. The wind came off Lake Michigan like a living thing, slipping between buildings, clawing at brick and steel, searching for gaps in coats and resolve. Snow didn't fall gently, it skittered sideways, driven low and fast, scraping across the pavement like broken glass. Streetlights cast cones of pale yellow that failed to warm anything they touched. Fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. Test shots, impatient, echoing off the skyline. But down on the streets, the cold ruled absolutely. Traffic crawled, taxis honked, bars spilled laughter and music through briefly open doors before the wind slammed them shut again. Chicago was preparing to celebrate the turning of a calendar, but the city did not pause for those who had nowhere to be. Ethan Walker rode straight through it. The old Harley rumbled beneath him, a sound deeper than the wind, steadier than the noise of the city. It wasn't loud in a flashy way. It was tired, familiar, earned. The bike had rust freckles along the frame and a headlight that hummed faintly when the engine idled, like it was reminding itself to stay awake. Ethan trusted that sound more than most people. He leaned forward slightly as he rode, broad shoulders wrapped in a black leather biker jacket that had seen better decades. The sleeves were scarred with pale abrasions, seams seftoned by rain and sun, and long miles. It wasn't stylish, it was honest. Underneath, he wore layered work shirts, faded denim, and heavy boots dulled by salt and concrete. His gloves were mismatched, fingers cracked from cold and work. Ethan was 44, built thick and heavy, like someone who had spent his life lifting things that fought back. Engines, equipment, problems. His arms were corded with old muscle, inked with faded tattoos that told stories he didn't explain anymore. His head was shaved close, the skin roughened by wind and years, with a short tail of dark hair tied low at the back. His beard was dense and untrimmed, streaked with gray that caught the streetlight when he turned his head. His face rarely gave much away. The lines around his eyes were permanent now, carved by sun, fatigue, and watchfulness. People tended to move out of his way without realizing why. Behind him, balanced with quiet precision on the reinforced rear seat, sat Duke. The German shepherd was all controlled poor, black and tan coat thick against the cold, ears alert without being twitchy. Duke's posture never slouched. He didn't fidget. His amber eyes tracked motion methodically, pedestrians, passing cars, reflections in windows. A faint white scar traced the bridge of his nose, barely visible unless the light hit it right. Duke wasn't young, but he wasn't slow either. He carried himself like something that had learned patience the hard way. They had been together long enough that they no longer needed signals. Ethan rode. Duke watched. Between them was an understanding built from silence, routine, and the kind of trust that doesn't announce itself. Ethan wasn't heading to a party. He hadn't been invited to one in years, and even if he had, he would have declined. New Year's Eve was expensive, loud, full of expectations he no longer kept. He was coming off a late call, an emergency heating repair in a 3-flat on the south side. The pay would barely cover the week's groceries, but he'd taken it anyway. People shouldn't freeze if something could be fixed, even temporarily. That was a rule he still followed, even if he bent most of the others. His phone buzzed once inside his jacket pocket. He ignored it. Whatever it was could wait until he stopped. The cold demanded focus. They passed under the glow of an overpass, graffiti frozen in place beneath layers of old paint and ice. Ethan slowed slightly as traffic thinned, choosing side streets where the wind cut harder. But the noise eased, his breath fogged inside his helmet. Duke leaned into the curve of the bike instinctively. That was when Duke shifted. It was subtle, just a change in balance, a redistribution of weight, but Ethan felt it immediately. Duke's head turned left, ears angling forward, attention narrowing. The dog's body stiffened, not with alarm, but with something closer to intent. Ethan eased off the throttle. They rolled past a closed supermarket, its windows covered with paper signs advertising holiday sales that had ended hours ago. Strings of half-lit Christmas lights sagged along the awning, blinking tiredly. The parking lot was empty except for drifting snow and a single abandoned cart tipped on its side. Duke leaned again, more insistently this time. "No," Ethan muttered into the wind. "We're not stopping." Duke didn't whine, he didn't bark. He simply shifted again, planting his weight in a way that made it clear the bike was not continuing forward unless Ethan forced the issue. Ethan sighed. He guided the Harley to the curb and killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt heavy, as if the city had leaned closer. The cold rushed in immediately. "What is it, boy?" Ethan asked, voice low. Duke dismounted smoothly and stood, tail low but not tucked, gaze fixed on the narrow service alley beside the supermarket. The alley was barely visible, just a dark slice between brick walls, half blocked by a dumpster crusted with snow. Ethan followed Duke's line of sight. He didn't see anything at first, just shadows and wind-driven flakes. Then Duke made a sound Ethan had heard only a handful of times before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't warning. It was recognition. A soft, strained sound, almost like a breath caught in the throat. Ethan's shoulders tightened. He pulled off his helmet and clipped it to the bike, scanning the alley more carefully. Years ago, he would have trusted his instincts first. Now, he trusted Duke's. "All right," he said quietly. "Slow." Duke stepped forward. The alley smelled of damp cardboard, old oil, and snow. A security light flickered at the far end, painting the brick in a weak orange pulse. Halfway down, behind the dumpster and a stack of broken pallets, something moved. Ethan adjusted his stance, boots planted wide. He kept his hands visible, open. "Hey," he called, not raising his voice. "You okay back there?" No answer. Duke advanced another step, head lowered. The wind gusted, pulling a corner of fabric free from the shadows. It was a person. A woman sat huddled against the wall, wrapped in layers that didn't match or fit. A man's coat swallowed her frame. A knit cap had slipped down over one eye. Her hands were bare, red with cold, clutching a thick canvas bag to her chest. She was shaking hard enough that her teeth clicked audibly. Ethan felt something in his chest give, just a fraction. He'd seen this before. Not her specifically, but the shape of it, the way the city made people small. "Ma'am," he said, taking a careful step closer, "I'm not here to cause trouble." The woman didn't look up. She pressed the bag tighter against herself, shoulders curling inward as if she could disappear by folding small enough. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket, fingers brushing the edge of his wallet. He was already thinking about who to call, how long response times were tonight, what shelters might still be open. Duke ignored him completely. The dog moved forward, slow and deliberate, until he was within arm's reach of the woman. He lowered himself onto his belly, posture submissive, and gently nudged her wrist with his nose. Ethan froze. "Duke," he warned softly, "easy." The woman's breath hitched. Her shaking paused, just for a second. Her head lifted. The light caught her face unevenly. She was thinner than she should have been, cheeks hollowed, skin dull with cold and exhaustion. Strands of dark blonde hair clung to her, temples damp with melting snow. Her eyes focused on Duke, and something changed. Her grip on the bag loosened slightly. Her fingers trembled as they lifted, hovering uncertainly above the dog's scarred muzzle. "Duke," she whispered. The words scraped out of her throat, barely audible over the wind. Ethan's heart dropped hard enough that he felt it in his knees. Duke made a soft sound of relief and leaned into her touch, tail sweeping once against the ground. The woman let out a shaky breath, like she'd been holding it for years. Ethan stepped closer despite himself. "What did you say?" he asked. She didn't look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed on Duke, as if the rest of the world had gone translucent. "He doesn't like fireworks," she murmured. "They hurt his ears." Ethan swallowed. The last time he had heard that sentence was 3 years ago, spoken in a warm kitchen, over burnt toast and a radio playing too loud. "Emily," he said before he could stop. Himself. The woman flinched, her eyes flicked up, unfocused, passing over Ethan's face without recognition. There was no spark of familiarity, no intake of breath, no widening of pupils, just confusion. "Don't," she said, voice tightening. "Don't call me that." Ethan dropped to one knee without thinking, the cold seeping through his jeans. "It's me," he said, forcing his voice steady. "It's Ethan." She shook her head, hard. "That's not... she... She's gone. The bag slipped open slightly as her hands trembled. Inside, Ethan glimpsed papers wrapped in plastic, edges worn, protected far beyond their apparent value. Duke pressed closer to her side, solid and warm. Fireworks boomed louder now, echoing between buildings as midnight crept closer. Ethan looked at the woman who wasn't supposed to exist, at the dog who clearly knew her, and at the alley that was no place for anyone to be tonight. The city counted down somewhere far away. Ethan Walker made a decision. The fireworks grew louder as the seconds crawled toward midnight, but in the narrow service alley, time seemed to stall, stretched thin by cold and indecision. Ethan stayed where he was, one knee pressed into slush that soaked through his jeans without his noticing. He didn't reach for the woman, he didn't say her name again. He had learned, in places far from Chicago, that some people shattered not because of what they remembered, but because of what remembering demanded of them. The woman, Emily, even if she would not claim it, kept her eyes on Duke, her fingers threaded into the thick fur at the dog's neck, as if he were the only solid object left in the world. Duke leaned into her touch, steady and warm, anchoring her against the wind that tore down the alley. Ethan shifted his weight slowly, making sure every movement stayed visible. "It's getting colder," he said, not as an order, not even as advice, just a fact. "You shouldn't stay out here." Her jaw tightened. She shook her head once, sharp and defensive. "I can't go," she whispered. "They look for people who move." Ethan didn't ask who they were. He didn't challenge the belief or correct it. He'd heard variations of that sentence too many times, from too many mouths, all shaped by fear that had learned to wear reason's clothes. "I'm not asking you to go far," he said. "Just somewhere warm, for tonight." She pulled the canvas bag closer, as if the word warm itself might steal something from her. Duke lifted his head and turned to look at Ethan. The dog's gaze was direct, assessing, not pleading, but it carried a question. Ethan answered it quietly. "I know." Midnight hit somewhere downtown. A chorus of cheers rose faintly on the wind, followed by a rolling thunder of fireworks. The sky bloomed briefly in washed-out colors that never quite reached the alley floor. Emily flinched as the first loud crack echoed overhead. Her grip tightened on Duke's fur, knuckles whitening. "It's just noise," Ethan said calmly. "It doesn't come down here." She didn't respond, but she didn't retreat either. Ethan stood slowly, joints protesting. He shrugged out of his leather jacket without drama, the cold biting immediately through his layers. The jacket was heavy, lined and worn, carrying the scent of oil, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of winter. He held it out, not toward her, but toward the space between them, and set it gently on top of the dumpster lid, close enough that she could reach it if she chose. "You don't have to take it," he said, "but it's better than wind." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Duke shifted, nudging the jacket with his nose, pushing it closer to her knee. Emily hesitated. Her eyes flicked to Ethan's bare arms, already reddening in the cold. "You'll freeze," she said. Ethan shrugged. "I've been colder." That was true, but he didn't elaborate. After another heartbeat, she reached out and pulled the jacket around her shoulders. It swallowed her frame, sleeves dangling past her hands. She inhaled cautiously, then again, as if scent itself were a language she half remembered. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. "Okay," Ethan said softly. "That's enough for now." He glanced toward the street. The wind carried the sound of engines and voices, but the traffic had thinned. People were indoors now, raising glasses, kissing strangers, counting down to something that promised change without guaranteeing it. Ethan turned back to her. "I've got a place nearby. It's not much, but it's dry, and there's heat." She shook her head, slower this time. "Doors lock?" "Yes." "Windows?" "Yes." She hesitated. "Anyone else there?" "Just me and Duke." Her gaze flicked to the dog again. Duke's tail thumped once, restrained but hopeful. Emily swallowed. "No uniforms," she said. "No questions." "No uniforms," Ethan agreed. "And no questions tonight." The wind howled again, rattling the empty shopping carts at the edge of the lot. Finally, she nodded. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Ethan didn't offer his hand. He stepped back instead, giving her space. Duke rose and positioned himself at her side, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Take your time," Ethan said. She stood slowly, legs unsteady, using Duke as leverage. The jacket slipped, and Ethan moved forward just enough to adjust it, careful not to touch her skin. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed when he stepped back again. The three of them moved out of the alley together. The Harley waited under the streetlight like an old animal, patient and familiar. Snow had gathered along the seat and tank. Ethan brushed it away with a gloved hand. Emily stopped short when she saw the bike. Her breath caught. "That's loud," she said, uncertainly. "It doesn't have to be," Ethan replied. "We can walk if you'd rather." She glanced at the empty street, then back at Duke. "How far?" she asked. 10 minutes riding, longer walking." She considered this, then nodded. "Riding's fine." Ethan pulled his helmet free and held it out, turning it so she could see the padding inside. "You can wear this," he said. "It'll keep your head warm." She took it reluctantly, fingers tracing the scuffed surface. Then, with Duke's help, she climbed onto the bike, settling carefully behind Ethan. Duke took his place behind her, steady as ballast. Ethan started the engine slowly, keeping the revs low. The Harley's rumble was controlled, almost gentle. Emily tensed at first, then gradually leaned forward as Duke pressed against her back. They pulled away from the curb, easing into the street. The city slid past in muted colors, brick, steel, neon reflected in slush. Fireworks bloomed. Overhead, brighter now, but distant. Emily kept her gaze fixed on Duke's ears, moving slightly with the wind. Ethan rode smoothly, avoiding potholes and ice patches with instinctive precision. He took side streets, then quieter ones, until the buildings thinned and the lights spaced farther apart. After several blocks, Emily spoke again. "You still ride in the cold," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "You always hated it." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "People change." She nodded, accepting that answer easily, as if it made sense to her, even if the memory behind it was missing. They reached the building just after the last fireworks faded. It was a squat brick structure above a closed auto shop, windows dark except for one on the second floor. Ethan parked beside the alley dumpster and killed the engine. The silence afterward was thick, but not hostile. Inside, the stairwell smelled of dust and old paint. The lights flickered before settling. Ethan took the steps slowly, keeping pace with Emily's uneven stride. Duke followed close behind, watching both of them. The apartment was small but clean. A couch patched with duct tape, a table with mismatched chairs, a space heater humming steadily near the wall. The air held the faint scent of coffee and machine oil. Ethan locked the door with a solid click. "You're safe here," he said simply. Emily stood in the center of the room, jacket still wrapped tight, canvas bag clutched to her chest. She looked around like someone entering a memory she wasn't sure belonged to her. Duke circled once, then lay down at her feet. The clock on the microwave blinked 12:03. A new year had begun. The heater hummed like it was thinking about quitting, then decided against it. Ethan stood near the wall for a moment, listening. He didn't move right away. Old habits died slowly, and some of them never died at all. You entered a new space, you learned its sounds. You let the room tell you if it was going to behave. The apartment answered with silence, the kind that didn't feel empty so much as tired. Pipes ticked faintly in the walls. Snow whispered against the window. Somewhere below, metal shifted as the building settled into the cold. Emily remained in the center of the room, her boots leaving damp half-moons on the scuffed linoleum. She hadn't sat down. She hadn't taken the jacket off. Her eyes moved constantly, cataloging corners, door frames, shadows under furniture. Duke stayed close, his body angled slightly toward her, head low but alert. He didn't crowd her. He made himself present without being demanding, a quiet gravity that gave the room a center. Ethan set his gloves on the table and rolled his shoulders once, easing the stiffness. He was aware of every inch of space between himself and Emily. Too close would feel like pressure. Too far would feel like abandonment. The balance mattered. "There's a bathroom through there," he said, nodding toward the narrow hallway. "Hot water works. Takes a minute to heat up." She followed his gesture with her eyes, then looked back at him. "Locks?" "Inside and out." She nodded. "Okay." Ethan moved to the kitchenette and set a pot on the burner. He filled it with water from the tap, the pipes rattling briefly before settling. He kept his back to her as much as possible, making his actions predictable. "I've got soup," he said. "Nothing fancy, just food." She didn't respond, but he noticed her grip on the bag loosen slightly. Duke crossed the room and lay down across the threshold of the hallway, positioning himself so that he could see both Emily and the front door at the same time. His presence was deliberate, like a sentry who had chosen his post. Emily noticed. Her shoulders eased a fraction. Ethan reached into a cabinet and pulled out two mismatched bowls. He poured the soup when it began to steam. The smell simple and grounding: broth, vegetables, salt. He set one bowl on the table and left the other on the counter. Then stepped back. "It's hot," he said. "You don't have to eat it now." She approached the table cautiously, as if the floor might shift beneath her. She set the canvas bag at her feet, but kept one hand looped through the strap. She didn't sit. She leaned over the bowl, inhaled, her eyes closed. For a moment she looked younger, softer, like someone remembering how to be human. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Bathroom's free." She hesitated, then moved toward the hallway. Duke rose and followed at a respectful distance, stopping short of the door when she reached it. She glanced back at him. "You don't have to." Duke lay down immediately, chin on his paws. Emily swallowed. She turned the bathroom handle and stepped inside, locking the door behind her. The sound of the shower starting came a minute later. Ethan exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders in increments. He leaned against the counter, rubbing his hands together to bring feeling back into his fingers. He didn't touch the canvas bag. The soup cooled slightly. He ate standing up, not hungry, so much as aware that not eating would make things worse later. Duke stayed in the hallway, unmoving. The shower ran longer than Ethan expected, long enough that he began to worry. He knocked once, gently. "You okay?" he asked. A pause. Then, "Yes." Her voice sounded steadier, thicker with steam. When the water finally stopped, Ethan placed a folded towel and a clean work shirt on the chair outside the bathroom. He stepped back to the kitchen and busied himself rinsing the pot. The door opened slowly. Emily emerged wrapped in the towel, hair damp and darker, cheeks flushed with heat. She looked smaller without the layers. The jacket pooled on the bathroom floor. The work shirt hung loose on her frame when she slipped it on, sleeves covering her hands. She didn't meet Ethan's eyes. Duke rose and approached her, sniffing lightly, then sat back on his haunches as if satisfied. Emily reached down and rested her hand on his head, fingers threading into his fur with unconscious familiarity. "That spot," Ethan said before he could stop himself, "behind his ear." Her hand paused, then moved slightly. Duke's hind leg kicked reflexively. She let out a startled laugh, short and surprised. "Oh," she said, "that works." Ethan felt something twist in his chest. He turned back to the sink and focused on drying the bowl. She ate the soup slowly, sitting this time, shoulders hunched forward as if protecting the warmth inside her. Duke lay at her feet, close enough that she could feel his breathing. When the bowl was empty, she pushed it away carefully, as though afraid it might disappear if she moved too fast. "Can I?" She gestured vaguely. "Stay here?" Ethan nodded. "Couch pulls out. Or the bed. Your choice." She looked toward the couch, patched and sagging. "Couch is fine." Ethan pulled out the folded mattress and laid down blankets. He worked efficiently, practiced. When he finished, he stepped back. "I'll be over there," he said, pointing to the recliner near the window. "If you need anything." She hesitated, then nodded. Duke circled once and curled up at the foot of the couch, positioning himself so that his body blocked the open space between her and the rest of the room. Emily lay down slowly, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her eyes stayed open, tracking the ceiling. The clock on the microwave ticked quietly. After a while, she spoke. "You still live near the tracks," she said. Ethan froze. "Yeah," he replied carefully. "There was always noise," she continued, staring upward. "But you said it helped you sleep, because if you could hear the trains, it meant things were moving." He swallowed. "I remember saying that." She nodded faintly. "I don't remember much, just pieces." "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to remember anything tonight." Her fingers tightened in the blanket. "I remember Duke." The room seemed to hold its breath. "He waited by the door," she said slowly. "Even when you were gone." Ethan closed his eyes for a second. "I know," he said. Silence settled again, heavier, but not hostile. The heater hummed. Snow continued to fall. Eventually, Emily's breathing slowed. Her grip on the blanket loosened. Sleep took her in cautious stages, like someone wading into cold water. Ethan didn't move. He stayed in the recliner, boots still on, eyes on the door, listening to the rhythm of two other living beings sharing the same fragile space. Outside, the city finished celebrating and began cleaning up. Inside, something quieter had begun. Morning arrived without ceremony. There was no sunrise worth mentioning, just a gradual thinning of darkness as the city exhaled its excesses from the night before. Snow still clung to ledges and fire escapes, packed hard by wind and footsteps. The sky remained a dull, colorless gray, heavy with the promise of more cold. Ethan woke before the heater clicked on. He didn't remember falling asleep. One moment he had been listening to the rhythm of breathing in the room, one slow and even, one deep and canine, and the next, the light had changed. His neck ached from the recliner. He rolled his shoulders carefully, joints stiff but obedient. Duke lifted his head at once, ears swiveling. "Easy," Ethan murmured. The dog settled, but his eyes remained alert, fixed on the couch. Emily slept on her side, knees drawn up, the blanket tucked tight beneath her chin. One hand rested on Duke's back, fingers curled into his fur as if she'd reached for him sometime in the night and never let go. Her face was relaxed in a way that felt fragile, temporary. Ethan stood slowly and moved to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, littered with paper cups and spent fireworks casings. A sanitation truck groaned past at the far corner, its orange lights blinking like tired eyes. The city was resetting itself. Ethan turned on the coffee maker, wincing as it sputtered to life louder than he'd intended. Emily stirred but didn't wake. Duke glanced back at Ethan, then returned his attention to her. The smell of coffee filled the room, bitter and grounding. Ethan pulled on his jacket and boots, then hesitated. He checked the time. He had a job scheduled mid-morning, boiler inspection across town. If he didn't show, he wouldn't get paid. If he left, he didn't know what Emily would do when she woke up alone in a strange place. He sat at the table and waited. Emily woke gradually, eyes opening to the ceiling, then shifting as memory caught up with her. Her body tensed immediately. She pushed herself upright, scanning the room. "You're still here," she said. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Morning." She nodded, absorbing that. Her hand tightened briefly in Duke's fur. Then she noticed the coffee, the quiet, the locked door. "Okay," she said. "Morning." She sat up slowly, feet finding the floor. Her movements were cautious but deliberate, like someone testing ice. "I need to go to work," Ethan said gently. "For a few hours." Her head snapped up. Fear flickered across her face, quick and bright. "I won't leave you alone," he added immediately. "My neighbor will be around. And Duke stays." Duke's tail thumped once in agreement. She looked down at the dog, then back at Ethan. "Doors locked?" "Yes." "Phone?" He slid his old smartphone across the table. "Mine. You can use it. No password." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Ethan poured her a cup of coffee and set it in front of her. "It's strong," he warned. She took a cautious sip, grimaced, then smiled faintly. "Still is." That smile lingered just long enough to hurt. Ethan gathered his tools and paused by the door. "I'll be back by noon." She nodded again. "I'll wait." He left quietly, locking the door behind him. The apartment felt different without Ethan's presence. The sounds were louder, the silence sharper. Emily sat at the table, hands wrapped around the coffee mug, listening to the building breathe. Duke stayed close. She finished the coffee and stood, moving slowly through the space. She touched the back of the chair, the edge of the counter, the window frame. Each contact seemed to reassure her that the room was solid, that it wasn't going to dissolve if she turned her back. Her gaze drifted to the canvas bag resting near the couch. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the worn fabric. The bag was heavier than it looked, weighted not by bulk but by care. She unzipped it halfway, then stopped, breath catching. Duke sat beside her, steady. "I should," she whispered. "I should look." She opened the bag. Inside were folders wrapped in plastic, corners frayed but dry. Papers, photographs, a small notebook with a cracked spine. Everything arranged with meticulous attention, as if order itself had been the only protection she could offer. Her hands shook as she lifted the top folder. The first photograph showed a house she recognized immediately. A narrow place near water, paint peeling, smoke stained in memory. Her chest tightened. She closed the folder abruptly and pressed it back into the bag. "Not yet," she told herself. "Not yet." She stood and paced, Duke following, always just close enough. Hours passed in fragments. Ethan worked through the morning with the focus of habit. He replaced a corroded valve, documented pressure readings, nodded through small talk he didn't hear. His thoughts stayed anchored to a couch patched with duct tape and a woman relearning how to breathe indoors. At noon, he rode back fast but careful, snow crunching under tires. Emily was sitting on the floor when he returned, back against the couch, the bag open beside her. Papers were spread out in careful rows like evidence being catalogued. She looked up when he entered. "I didn't go through everything," she said quickly. "Just enough." Ethan closed the door and removed his gloves. "That's fine." She held up the notebook. "This is mine." He nodded. "I thought so." "I don't remember writing it," she continued. "But I know the handwriting. I know how I cross my T's." Her voice wavered. "There are dates, places." Ethan sat on the floor across from her, keeping distance. Duke lay between them, content. "You don't have to tell me," Ethan said. She swallowed. "I want to." She opened the notebook to a marked page. "I wrote things down so I wouldn't forget, because I knew I might." Ethan listened. "They weren't accidents," she said quietly. "The things I saw." He nodded once, face unreadable. "I ran," she continued. "I fell. I hit my head. After that, it's fog. But I kept this." She gestured to the bag. "I protected it even when I didn't know why." She looked at Duke. "And I remembered him." Duke's ears twitched. Ethan felt the weight of the room settle around them. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," he said. Emily closed the notebook and pressed it to her chest. "I know." Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something fragile had survived the night. The afternoon did not announce itself with drama. It crept in through the cracks between hours, carried on the dull light that filtered through the window and settled on the floor like dust. The city outside had fully woken now. Engines passed, voices drifted up from the street. Somewhere nearby, a radio played a song that sounded cheerful enough to be suspicious. Emily sat at the table with the notebook closed in front of her, palms resting flat on the worn wood, as if she needed the contact to keep herself anchored. The words she had spoken earlier still echoed in her head, repeating themselves without asking permission. They weren't accidents. Saying it out loud had changed something. Not enough to bring clarity, but enough to make the fog feel thinner, as though light might eventually get through if she stayed still long enough. Ethan moved around the apartment with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that noise could be as intrusive as touch. He rinsed his coffee mug. He wiped the counter. He set his tools back into their places without clatter. Everything he did seemed designed to reassure the room that nothing sudden was about to happen. Duke lay stretched out on the floor, his body positioned diagonally between them, eyes half-lidded but alert. He shifted occasionally, adjusting to the subtle changes in tension that passed between the humans he guarded. Emily watched Ethan from the corner of her eye. "You didn't ask," she said. Ethan looked up. "Ask what?" "Details." She tapped the notebook lightly. "You didn't push." Ethan shrugged. "Pushing doesn't usually help." She considered that, then nodded. "Still." He dried his hands on a towel and leaned against the counter. "We've got time." The word time settled between them. It felt fragile, like something that could be taken away if acknowledged too directly. Emily's gaze drifted to the window. A bus hissed to a stop at the corner, doors opening and closing with mechanical indifference. People got on. People got off. No one looked up. "I used to take the bus," she said suddenly. "Every morning, same driver most days." Ethan waited. "He whistled," she continued. "Always off key. It used to bother me." She paused. "I think I miss it." Ethan nodded once. "Routine does that." She glanced at him. "You still fix heaters." "Yeah." "Even though you hate crawl spaces." He snorted softly. "Especially because I hate crawl spaces." She smiled at that, small and fleeting, but real. The moment broke when a sudden burst of laughter echoed from the street below, sharp and loud. Emily startled, her shoulders jumping, as if struck by a current, her breath caught, her hands curled inward. Duke was on his feet instantly, moving to her side, pressing his weight gently against her legs. "It's okay," Ethan said calmly. "Just people." She nodded, but her breathing had gone shallow, eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to open without warning. "I should go out," she said abruptly. Ethan stiffened slightly. "Out where?" "Anywhere," she replied. "I can't stay locked in forever." "That's true," he said carefully, "but it doesn't have to be today." She shook her head. "If I don't try, I'll stop wanting to." Ethan studied her face. He saw the determination there, thin but stubborn, layered over fear like ice over water. "Okay," he said. "We do it slow." They prepared without urgency. Ethan offered a scarf. She accepted it. He suggested the quieter street. She agreed. Duke waited patiently by the door, leash in his mouth. The stairwell felt narrower on the way down. Every sound echoed too loudly. Emily's hand brushed the wall as she descended, fingers trailing over peeling paint and metal railings. Outside, the cold bit immediately, sharper than before. The sky remained overcast, pressing low. The sidewalk was crowded with footprints. The snow churned gray. Emily stopped just outside the door, her breath fogged. Her eyes darted left, right, then back again. Ethan didn't touch her. He stood beside her, close enough to be felt, far enough to leave space. "We can turn back," he said. She swallowed. "No." They walked. At first, Emily counted steps. 10, 20, 30. She focused on Duke's steady pace, the rhythmic click of his nails on concrete. She avoided eye contact with passers-by, head slightly lowered. A man brushed past too close. Emily froze, breath hitching, body locking in place. Duke stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself between Emily and the street, his presence firm but calm. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He simply stood. The man muttered an apology and moved on. Emily exhaled shakily. "I didn't know he could do that," she said. Ethan's voice was steady. "He always could." They reached the corner and stopped. Traffic roared by, indifferent. Emily's knees trembled. "I think that's enough," she said quietly. Ethan nodded. "That's more than enough." They turned back. Inside the apartment again, Emily sank onto the couch, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with muscles. Duke lay across her feet, grounding her with warmth and weight. "I used to be stronger," she murmured. Ethan sat across from her. "You still are." She shook her head. "Not like before." Different doesn't mean weaker. She didn't argue, but she didn't agree either. The afternoon wore on. Emily dozed briefly, waking from shallow sleep with a start, before settling again when Duke nudged her ankle. Ethan sorted receipts, calculating bills he couldn't yet pay. As evening approached, the light faded early, dragging shadows across the room. The heater kicked on and off, unreliable but persistent. Emily woke fully as darkness settled. "Ethan," she said. "Yes?" "If I tell you more, will things get complicated?" He met her gaze. "Probably." She nodded. "Okay." She opened the notebook again, this time turning to a different section. Her finger traced a line of writing. "I wrote names," she said. "Not all of them make sense. Some are crossed out, some aren't." Ethan listened. "I don't know what they mean yet," she continued, "but I know they scared me enough to keep running." She closed the notebook, hands trembling. "I'm not asking you to fix it," she said. "I just don't want to be alone with it." Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You're not." Duke lifted his head, tail thumping once in agreement. Emily looked down at him, then back at Ethan. "You stayed." "Yes." "You could have pretended you didn't recognize me." He didn't answer immediately. Then, "I tried once. Didn't work." Silence settled again, this time softer, like snow. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary evening. Inside, the day ended without resolution, without fireworks, without answers, but also without abandonment. And for now, that was enough. The knock did not come hard. That was the first thing Ethan noticed. It wasn't sharp or urgent. It didn't carry authority or threat. It was the kind of knock that belonged to someone who wasn't in a hurry and didn't expect trouble. 2 quick taps, a pause, then one more, almost apologetic. Still, the sound cut through the apartment like a wire pulled tight. Emily froze mid-breath. Her body reacted before her mind had time to understand what was happening. Shoulders rose, hands curled inward. Her gaze snapped to the door, pupils blown wide, breath stuttering shallow and fast. Duke was on his feet instantly. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, he moved. The German shepherd positioned himself directly in front of Emily, body angled toward the door, stance wide and solid. His tail stayed low, his ears were forward. He was quiet, but everything about him said nothing gets past me. Ethan had already stood. He didn't rush the door, he didn't speak. He simply stepped into the space between the living room and the entry, placing himself where Duke could see him without breaking focus. "Stay," Ethan murmured, not as a command, but a reassurance. Duke held his ground. The knock came again, the same pattern. Emily shook her head, barely perceptible. "Don't," she whispered. "Please." Ethan turned just enough to catch her eye. His voice stayed level. I won't open it unless we know who it is. She nodded, though her hands were trembling now, fingers digging into the couch cushion as if it might anchor her. Ethan approached the door slowly and leaned close, keeping his body relaxed. Yeah? He called through the wood. A woman's voice answered, muffled but calm. It's Mrs. Alvarez, from downstairs. Ethan exhaled quietly. He cracked the door open just enough to see her. Mrs. Alvarez was in her late 60s, short and sturdy, wrapped in a thick coat patterned with faded flowers. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her expression equal parts curiosity and concern. She held a small paper bag in one hand. I saw your light on, she said. Figured you were back. Thought I'd bring soup. It's cold. Ethan nodded. Thanks, you didn't have to. She waved him off. Everyone has to eat. Her eyes flicked briefly past him, catching sight of Emily half hidden behind the couch, Duke standing guard like a living wall. Mrs. Alvarez didn't comment. She didn't stare. She simply set the bag down and smiled gently. Tell your friend welcome home. Then she turned and went back down the stairs, footsteps steady and unhurried. Ethan closed the door and locked it. The click echoed. Emily sagged back against the couch, breath shuddering as it released. Duke turned immediately, pressing his flank against her knees, grounding her with warmth and weight. I'm sorry, she said hoarsely. I didn't mean... You don't need to apologize, Ethan said. He crossed the room and crouched near her, careful not to crowd. Nothing bad happened. She nodded, but tears had welled up anyway, uninvited and frustrating. I hate that, she whispered, that it still happens. Ethan considered his words. It happens because your brain learned to keep you alive. She looked at him, uncertain. It doesn't feel helpful. It isn't, he agreed, but it's not wrong. She pressed her face briefly into Duke's fur, breathing in slow, deliberate pulls. The dog remained perfectly still, a steady, breathing thing in a world that felt too unpredictable. After a while, the shaking eased. Ethan stood and retrieved the paper bag from the counter. He opened it, releasing the smell of chicken broth and garlic. Mrs. Alvarez makes soup like it's a job, he said lightly. You'll be full for hours. Emily managed a faint smile. They ate quietly. The interruption had drained something from the room, but it hadn't broken it. The apartment settled back into itself, cautious but intact. Later, as afternoon bled into evening, Emily sat cross-legged on the floor with the notebook open again. This time, she didn't flinch when Ethan sat across from her. I think I remember why I wrote this, she said. Ethan waited. I didn't trust myself, she continued. I didn't trust my memory, so I trusted the page. She flipped through the notebook, stopping at a section marked with a strip of faded tape. The writing there was tighter, more deliberate. I wrote rules, she said, for myself. Ethan leaned closer, careful not to intrude. She read aloud, voice quiet but steady. Rule 1. If something feels wrong, leave. Rule 2. Keep moving until the noise stops. Rule 3. Don't talk about names. She swallowed. I broke Rule 3 today. Ethan didn't correct her. You chose differently. She nodded slowly. I think that means I feel safer. Duke's tail thumped once, as if affirming the conclusion. The heater clicked on again, rattling briefly before settling into its familiar hum. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft this time, flakes drifting straight down instead of sideways. Emily stood and moved to the window, watching the quiet accumulation. I used to like snow, she said, before it meant hiding. It can mean other things again, Ethan replied. Eventually. She turned back to him. You believe that? Yes. Not because it was comforting, because he'd seen worse things loosen their grip, one ordinary day at a time. As night settled in, Emily grew restless, pacing the small apartment in careful loops. Duke followed her without complaint, shadowing her movements. I don't want to sleep yet, she admitted. That's fine, Ethan said. We don't have to. He set up the old radio on the counter, tuning it slowly until he found a low-volume jazz station. The sound filled the space without demanding attention. Emily paused, listening. I remember this, she said softly. Not the song, the feeling. Ethan nodded. Background noise. She sat on the floor again, leaning back against the couch. Duke curled beside her, his body warm and solid. Minutes passed, then more. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders dropped. Ethan watched from the chair, eyes heavy but alert, hands folded loosely in his lap. At some point, Emily spoke again, barely above a whisper. "If things get harder, will you tell me?" Ethan met her gaze. "Yes. And if I forget again?" He didn't hesitate. "Then we start where you are." She nodded, accepting that answer with the seriousness it deserved. The radio murmured, the heater hummed, snow continued to fall. Outside, the city pressed on, indifferent as ever. Inside, something fragile held, not because it was strong yet, but because it was protected. The first sign that something was different came from Duke. He was lying near the door, head resting on his paws, when his ears lifted. Not sharply, not alarmed, but alert in a way that suggested recognition rather than threat. His tail didn't move, his body remained still. Only his attention shifted, focused inward, as if listening to something that wasn't sound. Emily noticed before Ethan did. "Why is he doing that?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked up from the table where he was sorting receipts into uneven piles. He followed Duke's line of sight, then frowned slightly. "He's thinking," Ethan said. Emily huffed a small, almost smile. "Dogs don't think like that." "This one does," Ethan replied. Duke exhaled slowly and lowered his head again, but he didn't fully relax. He stayed half awake, holding the room in place. Outside, the city had settled into a deceptive calm. The day after New Year's Eve always carried a strange hush, as if everyone were collectively recovering from having believed, even briefly, that things could change overnight. Snowbanks lined the streets, gray and stubborn. The sky remained low and heavy, pressing down on the buildings without urgency. Emily sat on the couch with the notebook open on her lap, turning pages carefully, as though each one might cut her if handled too quickly. Her movements were more confident than they had been days ago, but still deliberate. Every decision carried weight. "I found something," she said. Ethan didn't move. "Okay." She held up a folded sheet of paper. "This one isn't like the others." He shifted in his chair, giving her his full attention. "It's not notes," she continued. "It's a timeline." Ethan leaned forward slightly. Duke lifted his head again. Emily unfolded the paper and smoothed it with her palm. "I wrote dates, not exact, but close enough, and places." She took a breath. "I wasn't just running randomly." Ethan waited. "I was following a pattern," she said. "Or trying to break one." She tapped the page, fingers trembling just a little. "I kept moving away from certain areas, certain intersections, certain routes." Her voice tightened. "I think I knew where not to be." Ethan nodded once. "That makes sense." She looked at him sharply. "It does?" "Yeah," he said. "People do that when they're avoiding something specific." Emily swallowed. "I didn't remember what I was avoiding, just that I had to." The room felt smaller suddenly, as if the walls had shifted inward. Duke stood and moved closer to Emily, resting his chin on her knee. She absently stroked his head, grounding herself through the familiar motion. "There's more," she said. Ethan didn't rush her. She turned the paper over. On the back, written in darker ink, were 3 names. 2 were crossed out, 1 wasn't. Emily stared at it for a long moment before speaking again. "I don't know why I left this one," she said, "but I know it mattered." Ethan leaned back in his chair, breath slow and controlled. "Do you recognize it?" She shook her head. "No, but I recognize how it makes me feel." "And how is that?" She closed her eyes briefly. "Like standing near a train track. You don't see it yet, but you feel it coming." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Okay," he said. "Then we don't chase it." She opened her eyes. "What if it chases me?" Duke's tail thumped once, firm and reassuring. Ethan met her gaze. "Then we make sure you're not alone." The afternoon passed in careful increments. They talked through what could be remembered without forcing it, and left the rest untouched. Emily's energy waned as the light faded. By evening, she looked exhausted in a deeper way than simple fatigue. "I feel scraped raw," she admitted. "That's normal," Ethan said. "You dug around in places you haven't visited in a long time." She nodded. "I don't want to sleep." "That's okay," he replied. "We don't have to do anything you don't want to." She glanced at the door. "If someone came looking, would you know?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. "I don't think anyone's looking right now," he said carefully, "but I know how to notice when that changes." Her eyes searched his face. "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough to keep you here." That seemed to settle something in her. She leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. Later, as darkness settled and the heater cycled again, Emily stood and paced the room restlessly. Duke followed her, mirroring her movements with quiet patience. "I don't like not knowing," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up. "About what?" "About what happened to me," she replied. "I don't want it to own me just because I don't remember it." Ethan considered that. "There's a difference," he said, "between knowing everything and knowing enough." She stopped pacing. "Enough for what?" "To choose what comes next." She studied him. "And what if what comes next is dangerous?" Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Then we plan for that." She didn't push further. Instead, she walked to the window and stared out at the streetlights blinking on, one by one. "I don't think I was meant to disappear forever," she said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed. "You weren't." The words hung between them, heavier than before. That night, Emily dreamed. It wasn't a full memory, just impressions. Heat without fire, sound without source. The feeling of being watched without seeing anyone there. She woke abruptly, heart racing, breath shallow. Duke was there immediately, head lifting, eyes calm and steady. He moved closer, pressing his body against her side. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was telling him or herself. Ethan stirred in the recliner, alert, instantly. "You all right?" She nodded. "I think so." He stood and crossed the room slowly, stopping a few steps away. "Want some water?" "Yes," she said. He brought it and waited while she drank, hands shaking only slightly. "I remembered something," she said after a moment. Ethan stayed still. "Okay." "There was a choice," she said. "I had to decide whether to keep running or turn back." "And?" he asked gently. "I ran," she replied. "But not because I was afraid, because I was protecting something." She looked down at Duke, "Or someone." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "That's important," he said. She nodded. "I think it's time I stop running." The words settled into the room with quiet finality. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires hissing on wet pavement. The city breathed on, unaware of the small, decisive moment unfolding inside a modest apartment above a closed auto shop. Ethan returned to his chair, but he didn't sit. Instead, he said, "If you want to stop running, we do it the right way." Emily met his gaze. "What does that mean?" "It means we don't rush," he said, "and we don't do it alone." She considered this, then nodded. "Okay." Duke lay back down between them, a living line drawn in calm certainty. The past hadn't knocked loudly, but it had arrived, and this time it hadn't found the door unguarded. The morning came softly, not with alarms or urgency, but with light, thin and pale, sliding across the wall and touching the edge of the couch. Snow had stopped overnight. The city lay still beneath a dull winter sky, as if it, too, were holding its breath. Emily woke without panic. That alone felt like a victory. She lay still for a moment, listening. The heater hummed, pipes ticked. Somewhere below, a door opened and closed. Ordinary sounds, stitched together into something almost comforting. Duke slept at her feet, curled into a solid, breathing weight. His ears flicked once when she shifted, but he didn't move. He trusted the room now. Emily sat up slowly, blanket sliding into her lap. Her head felt clearer than it had in days, not sharp, not whole, but present. She looked around the apartment and felt, for the first time since she could remember, that she was allowed to be here. Ethan stood by the window, mug in hand, watching the street. He hadn't heard her wake, but he sensed it. He always did. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. She waited for the familiar rush of fear, the instinct to retreat or explain herself. It didn't come. Instead, there was a quiet resolve, fragile but steady. "I want to do something today," she said. Ethan turned, expression attentive but calm. "Okay." "I want to stop hiding," she continued. "Not everywhere, just here." He nodded. "That's reasonable." She smiled faintly. "You always say things like they're practical problems." "That's because they usually are." Duke stretched and rose, shaking himself once before padding over to sit beside her. Emily rested her hand on his head, grounding herself in the familiar texture of his fur. They ate breakfast together, toast, eggs, coffee, gone lukewarm. The simplicity of it felt profound. No one rushed, No one asked more than the moment could give. Afterward, Emily brought the notebook to the table. "I think it's time," she said. Ethan sat across from her. "We don't have to open everything." "I know," she replied, "but I want to choose what I look at, not let it choose me." He nodded. She opened the notebook to the first page she'd marked with tape. Her finger traced the lines of handwriting, steady now. "These are the places I avoided," she said, "because they connect back to something that wasn't safe." Ethan listened, not interrupting. "I don't remember every detail," she continued, "but I remember enough to know that what happened to me wasn't random, and that running saved me once." She looked up at him. "But running forever would have erased me." Ethan felt that settle deep in his chest. "I don't want to disappear anymore," she said. "I want to be Emily again, even if I have to learn how." Ethan reached across the table, not touching her hand, just placing his own near it. "Then we do it slow, and we do it with help." She nodded. "I already thought about that." She slid a piece of paper toward him, a phone number written carefully. "There's a community clinic," she said. "Mental health, legal aid." I passed it once, wrote it down. Ethan studied the number. "That's a good place." "I don't want to go alone," she admitted. "You won't," he said immediately. Duke let out a soft huff, as if to confirm the arrangement. They left the apartment together just after noon. The air was cold but calmer, the wind less aggressive. The street felt different today, not empty, not threatening, just present. Emily walked beside Ethan, not behind him. Duke paced between them, leash loose. The clinic was a few blocks away, housed in a converted brick building, with wide windows and a simple sign. Nothing imposing, nothing hidden. Emily paused at the door. Ethan waited. She took a breath. "If I freeze, we stop," he said. "And if I forget what I was going to say, I'll be there," he replied. "But you'll do the talking." She nodded, squared her shoulders, and stepped inside. The hours that followed were not dramatic. They were quiet, procedural, kind. A social worker listened without judgment. A counselor spoke in careful, grounding tones. No one rushed Emily. No one demanded answers she didn't have yet. Ethan stayed nearby, visible but unobtrusive. Duke lay at Emily's feet, calm as a promise. By the time they left, the light had begun to fade again. Emily felt drained, but lighter, like something heavy had finally been set down, even if only for a while. "I didn't know it could be like that," she said as they walked home. "Like what?" "Like people could help without taking things away." Ethan smiled faintly. "Good help does that." Back at the apartment, Emily sat on the couch and let out a long breath. Duke climbed up beside her, resting his head against her thigh. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "That's okay," Ethan replied. "Neither do I." She looked at him. "You could leave. You know that, right?" He met her gaze steadily. "I know." "And you're still here." "Yes." She studied his face, the lines, the wear, the quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. "Why?" she asked. Ethan thought for a moment. "Because this is where I'm supposed to be," he said simply. Emily nodded, emotion tightening her throat. That night, snow fell again, soft and clean. Emily slept deeply for the first time in years. No dreams, no running, just rest. Weeks passed, not perfectly, not easily. There were hard days, moments when memory pressed too close, when the world felt too loud. But there were also routines, appointments, walks, shared meals. Emily found part-time work at a used bookstore down the street, sorting shelves and making tea. The smell of paper and dust soothed her. Ethan kept fixing heaters, kept riding his Harley, kept coming home. One evening, as winter loosened its grip, Emily stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. "I think I want to stay," she said. Ethan looked up. "Here?" "With you," she clarified. If that's okay." He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded. "Yeah, that's okay." Duke wagged his tail, decisive. Spring came slowly. Snow melted into slush, then memory. The city softened. One afternoon, Emily and Ethan sat on the stoop outside the building, coffee cups steaming. Duke lay between them, eyes half closed in the sun. "I used to think surviving was the end of the story," Emily said. "And now?" Ethan asked. "Now, I think it was the beginning." Ethan leaned back, sunlight catching the gray in his beard. That sounds about right. They sat there, not talking, not planning, just existing together. Not running, not hiding, staying. Sometimes God's miracles arrive quietly through loyalty, love, and a second chance you didn't expect. If you're walking through a hard season, remember, you are not alone. God sees you. God is with you. If this story touched your heart, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories of hope and healing. May God bless you and protect you today. Amen.